One thing we need to talk about is absolute versus relative path. In our previous examples so far, we've used relative paths, which means from the Python file, from our script, we reference a file in the same directory. For example, if it's in the same directory, then the Python script just needs the file name, and the Python script will be able to find that file. However, we run into a problem when we're trying to access a file that's in a different directory than our Python script. And this problem is present on Windows, which most of you probably are using. So if there's a file that we're referencing in a different directory, we need to let Python know the absolute path, in other words, the full path of that file where it's located. So the problem is that Windows uses backslashes, and we'll look at an example of this here in a minute in PyCharm. Windows uses backslashes, which Python views in strings as escape characters. So that can mess up our path, and Python can run into errors because it will look at those and it won't interpret those as part of the file path. It will interpret those as escape characters. So there's three solutions. We can escape the backslashes, which again Windows uses by default for its file paths. So we could add another backslash. So for every backslash, we just add another one, and then Python knows, okay, this first one's an escape character saying, I literally want to have a backslash following. The second, and that's not recommended. I don't recommend that because it can just kind of get messy. The second method is using a raw string. We've used F strings in Python, and that's just by placing the letter F, character F, in front of our strings. And then we can input variables in brackets in those F strings. Python knows how to work with that. Python knows how to work with something called raw strings as well, which is where we place the letter R, lowercase r, in front of our string, which is our file path. And that causes Python to treat the string as a literal, and it ignores the escape characters. This is recommended on Windows because we don't have to change the file path from what Windows sees it as. All we have to do is add that little letter R whenever we're hard coding an absolute path in Python. So that's what I recommended. I'm going to show you that. We could also use forward slashes, and Windows will accept these, and it will work just fine in our Python programs. However, it's non-standard. It's not how Windows paths look like, so it just may look funny to Windows users. And also, it's just not quite as easy, I think, as using raw strings, because we'd have to change every slash from a backslash to a forward slash in our Windows paths. Where if you're using a Mac or Linux, you should just use forward slashes because that's how those file systems reference their paths. So let's take a look at this in PyCharm and just show you what I mean. So here we have what we've been working on. We had a to-do list. We wrote the lines to a file for our to-do list. And we see we have example.txt in the same directory in our file IO directory. We have a path here in PyCharm. I'm going to right-click and copy that path reference. So we see I could just paste that here. Well, if it copied, then we could. Let's try that again. Copy path reference. Oh, there we go. Absolute path. I forgot to click on that. So we're going to click the absolute path, and we can see path is, there we go. So if we open up our actual Explorer window as well, we see example.txt is in this same folder as file IO. What if example.txt, what if we wanted this file to be created up here under PyCharm projects instead of in this subfolder file IO? So let's do that. What we would do with relative paths, we'd input this whole URL and then // Okay, so this, I don't want to have it in file IO. I just want it in PyCharm projects. So it will create a file. I'm going to make it write the file. It will create example.txt in this directory. Now what I'm going to do, let's try and do that and see what happens. So let's run this. We get an error because it sees it's trying to do \u. It looks at that as it's trying to use an escape character on the u as an escape character, but that's not going to work. So we can put a little r here to make it a raw string, and now let's try. And I'm going to show you this file does not exist. Let's run it. Process finished. There's our file. There's our example.txt. So we just used an absolute path. Alternatively, and so that's the recommended method. As I said before, we could also escape each path. However, that's a little bit more tedious. As we see, let's name it example.2. But if we run that, that also works. And we've created example2.txt. Or we could also replace all of these with /, and Windows will understand that these days, and it will work. Oh, let's do example 3 just to see the difference. So it will work. So let's see. We've got our example 3 there as well. So those are some options. Raw strings are suggested. So that's an absolute path. That's the absolute path, and that helps us make sure we're writing our writing or reading. If we were reading this file, we could change this mode to read and do something here. But writing or reading, if we're referencing the absolute path, let's just use an raw string by adding that r in front of the file path. So yeah, hopefully, well, I know that's going to be a useful tip for you. So there you go.